Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. I hope you enjoy. Generosity and Glass, written by Nettle Queen. The galaxy considered us freaks. Of course, we didn't consider ourselves as such. It was the rest of the universe that was crazy. I mean, who would have thought that planets with liquid water could support life? Liquid water! You might as well go swimming in liquid nitrogen while you're at it. Brr. So, there we were, silicoid creatures in a carbon universe. The only reason anyone would talk to us was because we could manufacture their star drives at 1/10 of the cost. That's probably the only reason that they even were the slightest bit civil, and even then you could tell that they would just go on to juke on as fast as possible. So we kept to ourselves as much as we could, as much for company as anything. Like most sapiens, we are social creatures, and would have enjoyed the chance to acquaint ourselves with these strange, cold people. But it seemed that their hearts were as cold as the world's, because no sooner than we entered their system were we informed that unless we had something to sell, we should leave, because their habitats could not be adapted to our needs. Early on, we didn't mind. We told them that we had our own ways of compensating for the vast gulf in comfort zones, and if they would please give us or sell us somewhere relatively isolated for the purpose, we would take care of the installation. Then came other excuses. Your generators are too high energy, and if we allowed them on the surface and one of them malfunctioned, it would be a catastrophe. Well, we ran some simulations and it wouldn't be any worse than if one of yours was blowing up. Still, it's too risky. We don't have anywhere for you. But what about the desert of it? We don't have any isolated areas. And on, and on. Pretty soon, we got the hint and gave up trying to make friends and settled for making money. We were used to our galactic status as useful freaks by the time the humans arrived on the stage. They were not too different, psychologically speaking, from the other species. More rambunctious than most, but this was most likely because they were still relatively new to the idea of a larger universe, and had all the energetic curiosity of a child. We were sure they would calm down after a century or two, once the amazement wore off. We didn't get much in the way of gossip, but it was evident even to us, after a while, that these humans were unusual. Instead of growing up and taking their place on the galactic stage, they continued to explore for the sake of exploration, and engage in other activities that were considered hedonistic and wasteful by the galactic community. The humans responded to this attitude with the same maturity that it comported themselves with, which is to say that they extended their middle fingers, which I understand as a gesture of extreme insult in my memory serves, and continued as they had before. Though, having met a few of them, I personally think that they took a certain malicious pleasure in spitting in the eye of authority. We got here by following our desire to explore and discover, they said, and now that we're here, you want us to turn around and adopt an attitude that would have kept us planet-bound until the sun blew up. No thanks. Or something to that effect. I've never really been good at remembering speeches. It was inevitable that we would run into each other, if only because their starship's engines needed replacing, and we had cornered the market long ago. In retrospect, we shouldn't have been quite so surprised that it went the way it did. They had heard of us and been warned away. But when you need an engine, you need an engine. And so I found myself in front of a video screen with a human. Like all carbon life, they looked bizarre. Though, at least, they were vertically symmetrical. Apparently, my appearance was even stranger to the human than it was to me. It leapt out of its chair, and, if I was interpreting the tone correctly, cursing vehemently and invoking a deity. As per established protocol, both sides of exchange were muted and the translators were the only conduit for audio. But I didn't need a direct line to know that the human was yelling at his fellows. Though, to what end I could only guess, as the only noun that it was using was untranslatable. In less than 10 minutes there was closely to 20 humans gathered around the screen, all of them using untranslatable words in reference to me. I quickly tried looking up the wider interspecies dictionary, but it must have been a human-only word, because I couldn't find it in any available version, and the dictionary of the human languages was woefully incomplete. Eventually, they calmed down, and the one originally assigned to the communication spoke. I apologize for that. Your appearance took me off guard." The human's tone was far more respectful than any I'd ever heard. "No offense taken. you were looking for a replacement part for your engine? Ah, yes. Our alpha catalyzing ring is getting corroded and we wanted to replace it before it was too far gone. Still, that note of respect in his voice. How strange. Understood. Would you like us to install it, or would you prefer to do it yourselves? The human's mouth twitched upward on one side. You probably know more about what needs doing than we do. If you're willing to install it, that would be fantastic. The other human started murmuring in excitement. I could only guess, but it seemed so. And about how amazing it was that an untranslatable would be working on the ship. I nearly broke protocol to ask for a definition of the word they kept using, but at the last second my brain caught up to my mouth and I finalized the schedule for the repair instead. The repair went reasonably well. Their alpha ring was indeed badly corroded and likely would have blown out after the next jump. So we replaced it and sent them on their way. I was rather puzzled by their attitude, but I put it out of my mind as an anomaly to look into later. It was only a year later that the next human ship pulled into our yard. I was on communications again and was deeply torn between established protocol and my curiosity about what they saw when they looked at me. The burly human's eyes seemed to grow to twice their size as they looked at me. Well, damn if Jose wasn't telling the truth. There's real untranslatables in the universe. Habit locked down hard and I requested their purpose of their visit. It was a simple repair, so simple that I suspected that they had deliberately sought out our shipyard simply to verify what they had heard. Not long after that, we began to get human ships on a fairly regular basis. While we weren't very far off the popular route, stopping at one of our yards unless absolutely necessary was all but unheard of. Naturally, some of us began getting suspicious that either the humans were up to something, or one of the other civilizations had put them up to something. What they were up to exactly depended on who was telling the tale, but every day it was a different agenda. For the most part, I ignored the half-schizophrenic ramblings of the rumor mill, preferring to research all I could about human culture and history, hoping to come across the word they kept using to describe us, but had little luck. I became reasonably fluent in their lingua franca, though given the physiological differences of our mouths, pronouncing anything was next to impossible. It appeared that those fleshy flaps in front of their teeth play a large role in their language, and lacking such things, lips I believe they are called them, makes intelligible conversation more difficult than it's worth. I rather wish I had found the courage to ask for a definition sooner. It would have made what happened next far more understandable. When the human ambassador arrived, the yard erupted in panic. That the species had regular contact with us was unheard of already. That one would actually send someone to talk was treading the border between a fever dream and an outright impossibility. By the time I was the one with the most experience dealing with them, so I was naturally chosen as the one to receive the ambassador. I remember rather vividly that my biggest concern was that the pressure would bring my stutter out. I was fairly certain that I would die of embarrassment if that happened. The human was clad in an environmental suit, naturally, and it was bulky enough that I couldn't be sure whether the ambassador was a male or female. I hoped they wouldn't be insulted if I used the wrong pronoun. We had long ago scrapped the position of ambassador ourselves. No one was willing to get within miles of one of us, and their lack of cooperation meant that the most any other sapient saw of us was a video screen conference, and that itself was rare. Most preferred text-only communication, all the better to ignore our existence. So there I was, chosen as a representative of our race, or at least of our yard, which happened to be the largest of its kind. Thinking back, that's probably why the humans made contact there. They, like most people, put quite a bit of importance on things' size, assuming that something large must be important, because large things require more effort to maintain, or something. We regard large things as a necessary pain in the rear, preferring to have several moderately sized things to a very few large ones, if all other things are equal. There's some saying in the lingua franca about eggs in baskets that refers to the kind of situation, but the exact phrase eludes me. I was vaguely familiar with their gestures, so when the suited human inclined its head to me, I knew to return the motion. "Welcome to Hysak Yard," I said. "I am Kchi, and I would have the honor of accompanying you, if that is agreeable." "Of course," said the human. "We have much that needs to be discussed, and I would like to start as soon as possible." I hoped that I was simply interpreting the benign comment in the worst possible way, but my stomach began clenching nervously. "Then please, come this way." I began to head towards the room that had been set aside for the purpose of this conference. Once the human was settled on the bench that had been adapted for its shape, I asked the purpose of the visit. "To be honest, we're a little uncertain ourselves," the human said. "You see, we have a planet in our solar system that's just about ideal for you, climate-wise, but we can't just give things away for free, especially something as big as a planet, and the fact that you'd be so close to our home planet makes the military types twitchy. But the rest of us think that it's just because everyone calls you the untranslatable equivalent to monsters of the universe doesn't mean that that's the case, and we're willing to give you a chance, especially in the light of the marked lack of any kind of aggressive behavior on your part." For a long moment, I stared at the human, certain that this was some kind of bizarre joke. Excuse me, but could you say that again? It sounds like you are offering us a planet." My stutter made an appearance, but I was too shocked to really care. A definite note of amusement entered the human's tone. "In a way, it's completely inhospitable for us, but someone crunched some numbers for the hell of it, and it turns out that it's very similar to one you came from. Those of us with more, progressive mindsets figure that if we can't use it, but someone else can, we might as well see if we can hammer out some kind of agreement." I sat there and stared at them like an idiot for what must have been several minutes. "I'm here to ask if you're interested in the idea as a whole," said the human, not unkindly. "The official agreement will likely take weeks or months to hammer out, even if everything goes perfectly." It seemed amused by this for some reason. Something in my brain must have shorted out, because the human reached out with his upper limb and waved it in front of my forward eyes. "Are you okay, Kishi?" I twitched so hard I nearly flipped myself onto my back. I bit my tongue until I calmed enough to speak intelligibly. "I am fine." I paused to take several deep breaths and tried to get my thoughts into some semblance of order. "I cannot speak for everyone, and I do not possess anywhere near the authority to give you any kind of official answer, but I do not think that our leadership would be at all opposed to the idea." Its voice sounded both excited and pleased with my answer. "I'll let my superiors know. We'll send a message to the next ship as to when and where we can meet." I nodded, another human gesture I had learned, and wished it well on its journey home. Then I stared at the too narrow bench the human had occupied during our conversation. A colony. Our first colony. We might get a real colony on a real planet instead of roaming bands of ships strung together. Planets that we could occupy without extreme and expensive terraforming were rare beyond belief, and all the solar systems that had them were already occupied, and thus hostile. Except now, someone was willing to let us in. I started hyperventilating and went to get myself a strong drink. Long story short, it took about 7 years of negotiation, in no small part because we were suspicious as hell about the sincerity of their intentions, and the other races were making no small amount of noise about how the humans would regret associating themselves with such an unnatural creatures. But in the end, we hammered out a set of compromises that benefited both of us. We would get the planet called Venus. It would be ours to do with as we wished. Terraform it, blow it up, fling it into the sun, just don't crash it into Earth, as one cranky diplomat put it. In exchange, each of us living there who was not in poverty would pay 1% tax to the Terran government, and our yards would produce or repair 500,000 tons worth of ship, which amounted to 15 medium-sized freighters, 3 large warships, or about half the repairs of their navy required. "And we'll probably end up paying you for the other half," said one of the delegates. And they did. Venus was far from a paradise, too hot even for us, an absurdly long day and night. But once we raised the nitrogen in the atmosphere by nearly 10% and adjusted the ratios of some of the less common gases, it cooled off enough that the weather was quite pleasant. And the atmosphere was even more dense than the one we were used to, though not so much so that breathing was difficult. In fact, because the higher nitrogen content, breathing was actually easier, since you don't have to try very hard to get enough air. Of course, that wasn't even the best part. Since the air was so thick, we could fly. Our wings weren't large enough to support us at home, though we could glide very well. But on Venus, we could get into the air with a running start and keep ourselves there until we got too tired to keep flapping. Earned myself a pretty spectacular bruise figuring out how long that was, too. Not that I regretted it at all. The views were stunning. Humanity acted as if something of a buffer between us and the universe that regarded our kind as freaks of nature, and we supported their love of exploring and learning for the sake of finding out interesting things. It was as close to an ideal partnership as anyone could ask for. They would develop, we would build, and we would both benefit. Their asteroid belt was fantastically rich in metals and rare earth elements, which meant that we had as much raw material as we could wish for. Humanity had long ago decided on a policy of finders keepers in regards to extraterrestrial resources. As long as it wasn't in orbit around Earth's moon or having mining drones on it, it was the property of whoever got to it. There was a hiccup when we snatched up an asteroid that was a destination of a batch of drones. But since humanity had forgotten to tell us that they weren't able to do much but grumble and tell us to make sure that they hadn't earmarked our next target for their operations. We grew very close, metaphorically. With our help, they discovered and colonized 2 additional planets, and they returned the favor, helping us locate and adapt another hell planet, as they jokingly called our candidates for colonization. I was so busy with the talks, and then there was coordinating and terraforming and planning and executing the release of the flora and fauna, that it was another 2 years before I remembered to ask about the untranslatable word that they had used early on. We can hardly imagine my surprise when I learned that it was a name of a creature from their mythology. Depending on who was telling the tale, they were either guardians or tyrants, hoarding treasure, and the guardians of unfathomable knowledge, often ruling over elemental forces, and always powerful beyond measure. Dragons. End of story. I would quickly like to thank the T5 channel members and Patreons: Caspar Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Lord Azrakal, Dragzoon WRE, Holly's sister, Arcadian. Thank you very much.